The kitchen was a war zone of spilled milk and sugary cereal. A daily cereal summit Leo Maxwell navigated with the precision of a seasoned diplomat. 5-year-old Tom demanded the last dinosaur marshmallow. 3-year-old Lily clutched the box, her lower lip trembling. To Leo, this wasn't child's play. It was a high-stakes negotiation, where fairness was a volatile currency and consequences were measured in tears and sticky floors. Later, at the park, a shovel became a disputed territory. Lily, Tom's feeling left out. What if we make a digging team, and you get to be the boss of the dirt? Leo's voice was a soothing balm, his eyes missing nothing. The clenched fists, the subtle shift in posture. He'd once crafted multi-million-dollar marketing campaigns, dissecting consumer behavior with surgical precision. Now, his insights were applied to playground politics, a quiet mastery that felt both essential and utterly invisible to the world beyond his family. Inside the bustling cafe, a new crisis erupted. Lily, denied a second chocolate chip cookie, went rigid, a silent precursor to a full-blown public meltdown. "Sweetheart," Leo murmured, kneeling, "I see you really want that cookie. It looks so yummy. But our tummies need healthy food, too. What if we save half for after your carrots, and you choose which half?" His calm, nonverbal cues, the careful phrasing, worked like magic. Lily sniffled, then nodded. Across the room, Cassandra Vance, a woman whose world revolved around high-stakes political campaigns, watched. Her sharp eyes, usually assessing polling data, were fixed on Leo. A flicker of something unreadable, a nascent, wild idea, sparked in her gaze as their eyes met. Far from the cafe's gentle chaos, Cassie's world was a maelstrom. "No, Senator, the numbers are stagnant. The Thorne-Caldwell feud is poisoning everything. Voters are fatigued, disgusted." She slammed the phone down in her high-pressure campaign office, the face of Senator Harding on multiple monitors. The generations-long animosity between the two families was a political cancer, intractable, unyielding. Cassie ran a hand through her hair, desperate. Then, the image of a calm dad, a cookie, and a de-escalated toddler surfaced. A speculative glint, a dangerous, unconventional hope, ignited in her eyes. The aroma of lavender and freshly laundered sheets was the perfume of Leo Maxwell's evenings. It clung to his well-worn t-shirt, the soft fabric a welcome relief after a day spent battling imaginary dragons and real-life sticky messes. The house was finally quiet, the gentle hum of the dishwasher a lullaby to his own weary mind. He was just settling onto the couch, a half-read book in hand, when a sharp, insistent knock echoed through the silence. Not a neighbor's friendly rap, but a deliberate, almost official summons. Leo frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. No one ever knocked. His world revolved around playdates and pediatrician appointments, not unexpected late-night callers. He opened the door to find her, the sharp-suited woman from the cafe, Cassandra Vance. Her presence, framed by the suburban porch light, felt like a glitch in his carefully constructed domestic matrix. "Mr. Maxwell?" she asked, her voice crisp, cutting through the quiet night like a freshly sharpened knife. "Cassandra Vance, campaign manager for Senator Harding. We need to talk." Leo stared, bewildered, the soft glow of his living room spilling out into the unexpected, unnerving reality of her arrival. Leo led Cassie into the living room, a space usually dominated by colorful blocks and forgotten toy cars, now feeling strangely formal under her scrutinizing gaze. She didn't waste a second. "Mr. Maxwell," she began, her tone devoid of preamble, "I watched you today at the cafe. Your daughter, the cookie, the full-blown meltdown averted with a conversation." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his, intense and unblinking. That wasn't just parenting, Leo. That was a masterclass in de-escalation, in active listening, in strategic redirection. I've seen less effective techniques in high-stakes hostage negotiations. Leo blinked, a nervous laugh escaping him. "It was just a cookie, Ms. Vance. It was a microcosm of the political landscape." She shot back. "For generations, two families, the Thornes and the Caldwells, have held this state hostage with a bitter, childish feud. It's gridlock, it's voter fatigue, it's destroying Senator Harding's chances. I've thrown every lawyer, every negotiator, every PR guru at it, and they've all failed. They speak policy. They speak law. They don't speak tantrum." She paused, letting the absurdity hang in the air before delivering the punchline. "I want you to mediate a peace treaty between them, using your toddler tactics. And I'm prepared to pay you a sum that will make any spilled milk seem like pocket change." Leo's mind reeled. A peace treaty? With politicians? This was insane. Later that night, the house still silent, Leo recounted the surreal encounter to Sarah, his wife. She listened, first with a bemused smile, then with a thoughtful frown. "A toddler diplomat?" she mused, picking up Cassie's sleek business card from the nightstand. "It's absurd, right?" Leo ran a hand through his hair, pacing the soft carpet of their bedroom. "I'm a stay-at-home dad, Sarah. My biggest challenge yesterday was convincing Lily that broccoli was tiny trees for giants, Ely. Not mediating generations-long political warfare. What do I know about senators and congressmen?" Sarah stopped him, taking his hands. "You know people, Leo. You know how to read them. You know how to diffuse them. Remember that marketing campaign you designed? The one where you completely reframed the product's appeal by understanding the unspoken emotional needs of the consumer." He remembered. It had been brilliant, innovative, and felt a lifetime ago. "This is different," he whispered. But even to his own ears, the conviction wavered. Sarah squeezed his hands. "Is it? Or is it just a different kind of tantrum? What if this isn't a joke, Leo? What if it's an opportunity? A terrifying, ridiculous, impossible what if?" The word hung in the quiet air, heavy with both fear and an intoxicating, dangerous hope. The next morning, after a night spent wrestling with the what if, Leo stood in his kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator a stark contrast to the storm in his mind. He still felt ridiculous, a fraud teetering on the edge of a precipice, but Sarah's words echoed, "What if it's an opportunity? Ex doge propi." He picked up his phone, Cassie Vance's number a stark black against the screen. He took a deep breath. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice surprisingly steady when she answered. "Leo Maxwell. I've considered your offer. I still think it's completely insane, and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but I'll agree to a trial period." A brief silence on the other end, then Cassie's voice, sharp and immediate. "Excellent. No time for cold feet, Maxwell. Consider your trial period starting now. I'll send you a briefing packet, and my assistant will coordinate your schedule. Expect to be at HQ by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Dress smart. And don't spill anything." The line clicked dead. Leo lowered the phone, a nervous grin spreading across his face. He felt a jolt of adrenaline, a terrifying excitement he hadn't known in years. His old life, the one of spilled cereal and playground politics, was shrinking behind him. The unknown loomed, vast and intimidating. But for the first time in a long time, Leo Maxwell felt truly, exhilaratingly, alive. The campaign headquarters of Senator Harding was a maelstrom of organized chaos. Phones rang incessantly, keyboards clattered with furious energy, and young staffers, fueled by lukewarm coffee and ambition, moved with the hyper-focused intensity of toddlers on a sugar rush. Leo Maxwell, accustomed to managing a different kind of daily pandemonium, felt utterly adrift. Cassie Vance, sharp as a tack in a tailored pantsuit, gave him a brisk, no-nonsense tour. "This is comms, that's research, over there's digital strategy. You're a consultant." She'd announced to a few fleeting faces, offering no further detail, as if Leo were a secret weapon she wasn't quite ready to unveil. He nodded, trying to appear engaged, but his mind was already at work, observing. The tight smiles, the subtle eye rolls when a superior passed, the quick huddles of whispered alliances. It was all so familiar. Just like managing playdates, but with higher stakes and less finger-painting. Day 2 found Leo sequestered in a small, windowless office, the air thick with the dust of forgotten ambitions and stale coffee. Before him lay a formidable stack of dossiers. Thorne family, a legacy of power. Caldwell dynasty, the ascendant force, each thick binder overflowing with histories, grievances, alliances, and public personas. He devoured them. Here were the triggers. A decades-old land dispute, a perceived slight at a charity gala, a legislative bill that crippled one family's business interests. Here were the emotional narratives, the thorns, deep-seated pride in their historical contributions, the Caldwells, burning ambition to prove their worth against an entrenched establishment. It wasn't just policy. It was deeply personal, passed down like an heirloom grudge. He saw patterns, anxieties, and the profound need for validation, all cloaked in political rhetoric. This wasn't about legislation. It was about two powerful, overgrown children fighting over a shared sandbox. The enormity of the challenge settled over him. Daunting, but also strangely exhilarating. Later that afternoon, in Cassie's office, a large map of the state dominated one wall, crisscrossed with colored pins and campaign notes. "Our goal," Cassie stated, tapping a pen impatiently, "is a public, symbolic peace agreement. Senator Harding needs to look like a unifier, not a referee in a never-ending boxing match." She ran a hand through her hair. "Frankly, I still don't know why I let you talk me into this, Maxwell. But we're desperate." Leo remained calm. "I propose we don't start with negotiation," he said, drawing an invisible line in the air. "We start with emotional regulation, but with individual, informal meetings. Let them air their grievances, feel heard, before we even whisper, compromise." Cassie's eyes narrowed. "You want to babysit them?" "I want to understand them," Leo corrected, "before we ask them to share their toys." After a long moment, Cassie let out a frustrated sigh. "Fine. But if this blows up, it's on you, consultant." That evening, in the quiet solitude of his temporary office, Leo called Sarah. "It's intense," he admitted, his voice a little softer than usual. "Like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded, while someone's yelling the answers in Latin." Sarah's calming voice came through the phone. "But you're good at puzzles, Leo. And you always know how to listen. That's your superpower." He smiled, picturing her steady presence. "They're not toddlers, though, Sarah. They're seasoned politicians." "They're still people," she countered gently. "And every person, no matter how powerful, needs to feel heard, needs to feel understood. You know how to do that better than anyone." Her words were an anchor, grounding him in the swirling currents of the political world. He hung up, a renewed sense of quiet determination settling in his chest. He was tired, yes, but no longer adrift. He was ready. Senator Eleanor Thorne's office was not merely a room. It was a testament to generations of power. Ornate mahogany, heavy velvet drapes, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors stared down from the walls. The air itself seemed thick with history, a silent challenge to anyone who dared to question tradition. Eleanor Thorne, a woman whose silver hair was sculpted with the precision of a classical bust, sat behind an imposing desk that could have served as a negotiating table for treaties. Her gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept over Leo Maxwell as he and Cassie entered. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice a polished, low timbre that promised little warmth, "Cassandra tells me you're here to offer a fresh perspective." The slight hesitation on fresh perspective dripped with thinly veiled disdain. Leo, despite the condescension, remained calm, his posture attentive. He registered the subtle tightening around her mouth, the almost imperceptible clench of her jaw. Like a toddler fiercely guarding a favorite toy, he thought. Her pride was a fortress. She spoke of the Thornes, long-standing contributions, the delicate balance of their political landscape, and the unsuitability of outside interference. Each word was a brick in a wall built not just to keep people out, but to keep her own anxieties safely tucked away. Leo understood. This wasn't just a political figure. This was a matriarch defending her legacy, her family's story. And like any child, she needed to be heard, to have her feelings acknowledged, before any real conversation could begin. The moment the heavy office door closed behind them, Cassandra Vance let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through her impeccably styled hair. "Well, that was a colossal waste of time," she muttered, starting the car with an aggressive turn of the key. "She practically chewed us up and spat us out. Fresh perspective." "Right. What did you even get from that, Leo? Besides a lecture on antique furniture?" Leo leaned back, unfazed. Actually, quite a lot, Cassie. He paused, allowing her exasperation to simmer. Her left hand, when she was talking about the Caldwells, it kept fluttering towards the portrait of her great-grandfather. A protective gesture. And her eyes, when she mentioned outside interference, they narrowed, but then softened just for a second. Almost sad. She's not just angry, she's weary. And she feels deeply disrespected, as if her family's entire history is being dismissed. Cassie, who had been drumming her fingers impatiently on the steering wheel, stopped. She turned to Leo, her jaw dropping almost imperceptibly. He saw the flicker in her eyes, a spark of surprise, then a reluctant recognition. "You saw all that?" she asked, her voice hushed, devoid of its usual bite. "It's how I read Lily when she's about to throw her plate across the kitchen," Leo said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "They both have very clear triggers and deep-seated needs." For a moment, Cassie was silent, truly contemplating. Then, a slow, grudging nod. "All right, Toddler Whisperer, let's see what your magic trick can do with Caldwell." Congressman Ethan Caldwell's office was the antithesis of Thorne's, a stark, gleaming monument to modern ambition. Glass walls, minimalist art, and multiple digital screens flashing poll numbers and news feeds. Caldwell himself, younger, sharper suited, and radiating a restless energy, met them with a firm handshake and an even firmer glare. He saw Leo as a trivial distraction, an unnecessary detour in his relentless pursuit of political dominance. "So, you're the community liaison they've brought in," Caldwell said, his voice clipped, his eyes darting between Leo and Cassie, searching for weakness. He didn't wait for an answer. He launched into a fiery monologue about the Thorns, obstructionism, their outdated policies, and his own family's progressive vision for the state. He saw the feud not as a problem to be solved, but as a political advantage to be exploited. Leo listened, his gaze steady. He observed Caldwell's emphatic hand gestures, the way his voice ratcheted up a notch when he felt he wasn't being fully heard. The performative anger that masked a deep need for validation. It was the 5-year-old Tom, demanding to be the boss of every game, convinced that if he yelled loudest he'd win. Caldwell needed to win. And for him, winning meant humiliating the Thorns. The meeting concluded abruptly, Caldwell dismissing them with a wave of his hand, clearly convinced they had nothing to offer. He was wrong. Back in his temporary, windowless office at HQ, the buzzing fluorescence a stark contrast to the quiet hum of his home, Leo began to outline his strategy for Cassie. She watched, arms crossed, still skeptical but undeniably intrigued. "Look, they're not rational political actors right now," Leo explained, drawing analogies on a small whiteboard. "They're two deeply wounded children, each convinced the other started it, each desperate for their pain to be acknowledged." He pointed to Thorne's column. "Senator Thorne needs respect for her legacy, validation for her family's contributions. Caldwell," he moved to the other column, "needs recognition for his ambition, validation that his vision is just as important, if not more so, than hers." He proposed a series of separate, informal engagements. No policy, no debates, no direct confrontation. We start with validation, make them feel heard. Then, redirection, finding shared interests that aren't tied to their feud. Only then can we even think about consequences or compromise. Cassie raised an eyebrow, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "So we're going to give them a political timeout?" Leo smiled faintly. "Something like that. We're going to teach them how to play nice, one tantrum at a time." Cassie let out a short, surprised laugh. "All right, Leo, you've got your marching orders. Let's see if your toddler logic can actually rewrite history. What if the key to unlocking a hardened politician's defenses wasn't a policy paper, but a painting?" For Leo Maxwell, the world's most complex problems often mirrored the simple, profound needs of a toddler. Senator Eleanor Thorne, he'd observed, was a child desperate for respect, for her history to be seen, not just her present political stance. And so Leo orchestrated a chance encounter. He found her not in the sterile halls of power, but in the hushed elegance of the State Art Gallery, ostensibly admiring a Gilded Age landscape. Leo approached, a quiet confidence replacing his earlier nervousness. He didn't speak of bills or budgets, but of brushstrokes, of the artist's dedication, of the legacy captured on canvas. Thorne, initially stiff, her posture as rigid as the antique frames around them, listened. He spoke of the painting's subtle narrative, its connection to the state's earliest patrons, her family among them. Her eyes, which usually held a steely, dismissive glint, softened, a flicker of genuine passion ignited. For a brief, precious moment, she wasn't a senator. She was simply a connoisseur, sharing a quiet, intellectual appreciation. The next day, Leo returned to Senator Thorne's opulent office, not with a new proposal, but with a carefully chosen follow-up question about the gallery's upcoming exhibitions. His aim was to deepen the small crack he'd made in her formidable facade. "Senator," he began, "I couldn't help but notice the subtle nods to your family's history in some of the gallery's older pieces. Your ancestors, I understand, were instrumental in the state's early cultural development." He watched her closely, seeing the barely perceptible shift in her shoulders. Like a child who, after a tantrum, craves reassurance, Thorne yearned for her lineage to be acknowledged. He wasn't asking for political compromise. He was offering profound respect. Her gaze drifted to a framed, sepia-toned photograph on her desk, a stern-faced man with a determined glint in his eye. "My grandfather," she said, her voice softer than Leo had yet heard it. He believed that a state's true wealth lay not in its coffers, but in its character, its stories. He built the first public library in this city, faced down every modern idea of his day. A rare, almost poignant vulnerability touched her features. It was a story of heritage, of vision, and of the quiet, undeniable pride of a family's enduring contribution. The senator, though still formidable, was visibly less rigid. Congressman Ethan Caldwell was a different kind of challenge. Where Thorne was about legacy, Caldwell was about validation, about winning. He was the toddler who needed to feel like the fastest runner, the strongest builder. Leo knew he couldn't approach him with art history. He needed to speak the language of competition, of strategy, of the immediate, tangible win. Leo found his opportunity at a local charity basketball game, a blur of sweat and shouted encouragement. Caldwell, though in his late 40s, played with the intensity of a college athlete, his eyes blazing with competitive fire. After the game, as Caldwell wiped sweat from his brow, Leo approached. "Congressman," he said, not with political platitudes, but with a genuine, insightful compliment. "That last play, the pick and roll you ran with Johnson, brilliant. Completely opened the lane. You really see the whole court." Caldwell, initially wary, a defensive wall still up, paused. His chest puffed out slightly. He wasn't being asked for a vote. He was being seen, truly seen, for his skill. A smile, a genuine competitive smile, touched his lips. He saw Leo not as a political operative, but as an observer who understood the game, an unexpected ally in a different arena. That unexpected connection led to a casual drink at a nearby bar, a noisy, unpretentious place far removed from the polished marble of political offices. Leo knew this was his chance to delve deeper, to uncover the hidden wounds beneath Caldwell's competitive bluster. He subtly steered the conversation, not to the Thorne family directly, but to the universal frustrations of long-standing rivalries, drawing analogies from sports. "It's tough when you're always competing against the same opponent," Leo mused, swirling his drink. "Especially when you feel like the refs, or even the crowd, always favor the other side, no matter what you do." Caldwell, feeling heard, unjudged, and in a neutral territory, finally vented. He spoke of historical injustices, of Thorne family slights dating back decades, of his own father's political career being undermined by their influence. His voice, usually so controlled, cracked with raw anger and a profound sense of disrespect. Leo listened, mirroring Caldwell's language, validating his anger, much like calming a frustrated child by acknowledging their feelings. "So what I hear, Congressman," Leo said softly, "is a deep sense of betrayal, a feeling perpetually underestimated, even deliberately hampered, by those who have always held power." Caldwell nodded, his anger still present, but the catharsis of being truly heard was palpable. Leo knew he'd found a hidden wound. The next morning, back in Cassie's office, Leo laid out his findings. Senator Thorne, he explained, tapping his pen on the whiteboard, her core need is respect for her legacy. She sees compromise as a betrayal of her ancestors. Caldwell, on the other hand, needs validation, recognition for his own achievements, and a sense that he's winning. He sees compromise as weakness. Cassie, her skepticism still battling with a grudging admiration, leaned back. You actually got them to talk without spitting venom, Leo. That's unprecedented. Leo nodded. They're not ready to negotiate policy. Not yet. They're still in the my toy is better phase. But they both want to be seen, to be heard, and to feel important. That's our leverage. He then proposed the next, audacious step. We need a low-stakes playdate, a neutral ground where they can interact, not as political rivals, but as community members. Something focused on shared interests, a common goal that has nothing to do with their families' feud. Cassie stared at him, rubbing her temples. A playdate, she repeated, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. For two of the most powerful, stubborn politicians in the state. She sighed, then pushed a calendar towards him. All right, Diplomat Dad, let's arrange a playdate. The stakes were about to get much higher. The aroma of freshly turned earth mingled with the faint, nervous scent of expensive cologne and perfume in the newly restored community garden. It was mid-morning, a gentle sun dappling through young saplings, yet the air was thick with an unspoken tension. Senator Eleanor Thorne arrived first, her tailored suit, a stark contrast to the gardening gloves Leo pressed into her hand. Her eyes, usually sharp and discerning, darted around, assessing the situation as if it were a hostile press conference. Congressman Ethan Caldwell followed minutes later, a forced smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes, accepting a shovel with a brusque nod. The two political titans, usually locked in a bitter public dance, now stood awkwardly, several feet apart, under Leo Maxwell's watchful eye. Cassie Vance, ever the pragmatist, leaned against a nearby wrought iron fence, arms crossed, a silent sentinel of skepticism. Leo, however, moved with the quiet confidence of a parent managing a particularly delicate playdate. He spoke in a calm, clear voice, explaining the symbolic tree planting, encouraging them to work alongside local volunteers. Think of it as laying foundations, he suggested, his gaze sweeping between the two. He knew this wasn't about policy or power, not yet. This was about shared purpose, about getting their hands dirty together, metaphorically and literally. He saw the way Thorne hesitated, then plunged her shovel into the rich soil. How Caldwell, despite his initial reluctance, began to dig with competitive vigor. It was a subtle choreography, a fragile truce, orchestrated by a man who knew how to turn potential conflict into collaborative effort, one gentle nudge at a time. As the small, sturdy sapling found its new home in the earth, a fragile quiet settled over the garden. The air, no longer quite so charged, allowed a distant sound to drift closer, the joyful, uninhibited laughter of children from a nearby playground. Thorne and Caldwell, having completed their symbolic task, moved towards a communal washing station, their movements still stiff, wary. As water flowed over their gloved hands, Leo subtly guided the conversation, his voice soft. You know, he mused, that playground reminds me, wasn't there a big community push for something similar, decades ago? A children's park project, I think. I remember reading about it in the historical archives. Thorne paused, a drop of water clinging to her cheek like a tear. The Elmwood Park Initiative, she murmured, a flicker of something almost wistful in her eyes. My grandfather championed it, fought tooth and nail for the funding. Caldwell, drying his hands with a towel, surprised even himself by chiming in. My father was on the city council then. He helped push it through, despite certain opposition. The words hung in the air, a rare absence of animosity. For a fleeting moment, the weight of their families, decades-long feud lifted, replaced by a shared memory of something positive, something they had both, indirectly, contributed to. Leo watched, a silent observer of this almost imperceptible crack in their hardened facades. It was a small victory, a thread of common humanity woven into the fabric of their rivalry, a seed of peace planted in the fertile ground of shared history. Back in the sterile, air-conditioned confines of Cassie's office, the energy of the garden felt a world away. Leo recounted the subtle shifts he'd observed, the brief, almost imperceptible moments of shared humanity. "It's like with kids," he explained, gesturing with his hands. "You build positive associations, shared experiences, before you tackle the big stuff. It creates a baseline of trust." Cassie, however, tapped a pen impatiently against her desk, her expression a mix of grudging admiration and professional urgency. "I grant you, Leo, getting them to share a shovel without a physical altercation is a miracle. But we can't just plant trees indefinitely. We need to address the actual grievances. The elephant in the room needs to be wrestled, not distracted with pretty flowers." Leo nodded, understanding her impatience. He knew the playdate had its limits. "You're right," he conceded. "But we address it as problem-solving, not blame-gaming. We focus on identifying the pain points, not just who caused them. We ask, what do we need to do to make this better for everyone, not whose fault is this?" It's the difference between asking Lily why she hit Tom and asking both of them what they need to feel safe and respected. Cassie sighed, running a hand through her hair. Toddler tactics in a political war zone. "All right, Maxwell, you've earned yourself a shot at the big leagues. Let's plan for a formal, but still private, mediation session. No more gardening." That evening, the familiar sounds of his children's soft breathing from their rooms was a balm to Leo's frayed nerves. He found Sarah curled on the couch, a book in her lap. He sank beside her, the day's political machinations feeling impossibly heavy. "They actually talked," he confessed, a mix of awe and anxiety in his voice. "About a park project, decades ago. Not about bills or endorsements, just community." He described the fragile truce, the small glimmer of shared humanity, but the real talk is next. The history. The accusations. It feels like trying to mediate a feud between two very powerful, very stubborn 5-year-olds who've been holding on to a grudge for 50 years. Sarah laid her book aside, turning to him, her eyes warm and steady. "Even adults need to feel heard, Leo," she reminded him, her voice soft but firm, "and respected. Just like Lily needs to know her feelings are valid, even when she's throwing a tantrum over a cookie, and Tom needs to feel like his side of the story matters." She reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "This isn't just about politics, is it? It's a deeply rooted family disagreement. And you, my love, are the best family counselor I know. You see the human underneath the title, the child beneath the suit. That's your superpower." Her words were a quiet anchor, pulling him back to the core of his abilities, fortifying him for the looming challenge. The polished conference table, usually a stage for corporate battle, now felt like a sandbox where two powerful, overgrown children were about to unleash decades of pent-up animosity. Senator Eleanor Thorne, her silver hair coiled impeccably, sat ramrod straight, her gaze fixed just beyond Caldwell, as if he were a particularly unpleasant stain on the wall. Congressman Ethan Caldwell, conversely, leaned forward, a coiled spring of indignation, his jaw tight. Cassie watched from a discreet corner, her arms crossed, a knot of professional anxiety tightening in her stomach. Leo, standing at the head of the table, felt the palpable tension humming in the air, a familiar energy that reminded him of the electric silence before Lily's inevitable meltdown over a mismatched sock. He took a slow breath. "Senator Thorne," he began, his voice calm, clear, cutting through the thick atmosphere. "You have the floor. I ask only that you speak of your experiences, your feelings, not accusations." Thorne's lips, a thin line of berry lipstick, barely moved. "My experience, Mr. Maxwell, is that for 3 generations, the Caldwell family has systematically undermined every attempt at progress this state has made, solely to advance their own narrow interests." Her voice, initially restrained, gained a brittle strength. She recounted perceived slights, legislative betrayals, and public humiliation stretching back to her grandfather's time, each word a carefully honed arrow. She painted a picture of a proud lineage constantly battling a disruptive, opportunistic force. Caldwell's face flushed a mottled red, his fists clenching beneath the table. Cassie winced, anticipating the eruption. When Thorne finally finished, a faint tremor in her hand, the only betrayer of her composure, Leo turned to Caldwell. "Congressman Caldwell," he said, his gaze steady. "Your turn, your feelings." Ethan Caldwell exploded. "Feelings? My feelings are that Senator Thorne lives in a gilded cage of ancestral privilege, completely out of touch with the real people of this state. Her family built their empire on backroom deals and cronyism, and then they accuse of narrow interests. They've actively blocked every initiative that would help working families, simply because it didn't have a Thorne name attached to it." His voice rose, sharp and accusatory, his finger jabbing the air. This wasn't merely politics. This was a deeply personal, generational vendetta, a raw, festering wound that Leo knew had to be lanced before it could ever heal. As Caldwell's voice reached a fever pitch, threatening to shatter the fragile civility, Leo stepped forward, not to interrupt, but to intercept. He raised a calming hand, not in a gesture of silence, but of understanding. "Congressman," Leo interjected, his voice unwavering, "what I hear is a profound sense of frustration. You feel deeply disrespected, as though your efforts and your family's contributions have been repeatedly undermined by the Thornes, and that this has directly harmed the people you represent. Is that accurate?" Caldwell paused, mid-rant, his eyes wide with surprise. He blinked, the anger in his face momentarily replaced by a flicker of confusion, then a grudging nod. No one in his political life had ever responded to his fury with such disarming validation, much less paraphrased his emotional core so succinctly. Leo then turned to Thorne, whose lips were pressed into an even thinner line. "And, Senator," he continued, "what I hear from you is a deep sense of injustice. You feel that your family's long-standing legacy and dedication to the state have been consistently devalued, even tarnished, by the Caldwells' actions, and that this disrespect threatens the very foundation of what you hold dear. Am I understanding you correctly?" Thorne, too, was visibly taken aback. Her rigid posture softened ever so slightly. She offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod. "Precisely, Mr. Maxwell," she conceded, the words sounding foreign even to her. A fragile quiet settled over the room. Cassie, who had been bracing for utter chaos, slowly lowered her arms. She stared at Leo, a silent testament to the power of his toddler protocol. He hadn't told them to stop fighting. He had simply mirrored their pain, validated their anger, and in doing so had subtly deflated its immediate intensity. It was the same magic he worked when Lily screamed about her juice cup. Acknowledge the feeling, then pivot. The battle wasn't over, but the combatants, for a fleeting moment, felt seen, not judged. Leo seized the moment of fragile calm. He moved to a large flip chart, marker in hand. "Thank you both," he said, his voice even. "Now, if we can acknowledge these very real, very powerful feelings, let's consider something else. When Tom and Lily fight over a toy, they both want it. But often, if I ask them what they really want, fun, connection, to feel important, the toy itself becomes less central. So beyond the grievances, beyond the historical narratives, what do you both want for this state? What are the shared toys that matter to both the Thorne and Caldwell families?" Thorne scoffed softly. "What we want, Mr. Maxwell, is for the state to be governed with integrity and foresight, not short-sighted populism." Caldwell bristled, but before he could retort, Leo interjected, "Integrity and foresight. Excellent. Congressman Caldwell, what would you add to that?" Caldwell hesitated then. "Economic growth, jobs for our constituents, a future where our young people don't have to leave the state to find opportunity." Leo nodded, writing integrity, foresight, economic growth, and jobs on the flip chart. "And Senator Thorne, would you disagree with the importance of economic growth and opportunities for young people?" Thorne paused, her gaze flicking between the words on the chart and Caldwell's wary expression. "No," she admitted grudgingly, "those are vital. But the asterisk means by which we achieve them." "We'll get to the means," Leo interrupted smoothly, "but for now, let's focus on the end goals. What else do you both share a desire for? Stronger education? Better infrastructure? Cleaner environment?" He led them, patiently, relentlessly, through a series of questions, forcing them to articulate a vision for the state that, surprisingly, overlapped far more than their animosity suggested. Gradually, a list of bipartisan objectives emerged on the flip chart. Education reform, sustainable infrastructure, healthcare access. They were still wary, still exchanging glances that could curdle milk, but they were, undeniably, looking at the same list. A small step forward indeed. During a brief break, As Thorne and Caldwell retreated to their respective corners for hushed phone calls, Cassie pulled Leo aside into a quiet anteroom. Her usual crisp demeanor was replaced by something akin to awe. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide. "Leo," she whispered, shaking her head slowly, I don't know what to say. I've worked in this business for 20 years. I've seen the best negotiators, the most seasoned diplomats. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought it was possible to get those two to even acknowledge the same sky, let alone agree on shared goals. You actually did it." Leo offered a small, tired smile. "It's just active listening, Cassie, and finding the shared toy." "Shared toy," she repeated, a wry grin finally breaking through her astonishment. "Right. Well, consider me a convert, Leo Maxwell. A full card-carrying member of the Toddler Diplomacy fan club. What do you need? Anything. Their aides? Consider them your personal play facilitators. More coffee? A nap schedule? Just tell me." Her genuine belief, so hard-won, was a powerful validation for Leo. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mission, and he had an unexpected ally in the most cynical corners of the political world. He gave her a confident nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. The cynicism was still there, but now it was tempered with a potent dose of hope. When the session resumed, the air, though still thick with history, carried a different current. The antagonism hadn't vanished, but it was now laced with a reluctant, almost bewildered curiosity. Leo pointed to the flip chart, now filled with their reluctantly agreed-upon shared goals. "Okay," he stated, his voice ringing with renewed purpose. "We have our common ground. Now, how do we get there? What are the concrete, actionable steps we can take together to achieve these goals? Let's think win-win scenarios. Not what you lose by compromising, but what you gain by collaborating." He guided them through a discussion of potential bipartisan initiatives. When Thorne started to slip into historical precedent, "My father always said," Leo gently redirected, "Senator, how might your father's wisdom apply to a new solution for today's infrastructure challenges?" When Caldwell attempted to frame a proposal as a victory over the Thornes, Leo reframed it as a strategic investment for the future of the state. Slowly, painfully, line by line, a preliminary framework began to take shape on a fresh sheet of the flip chart. A community investment pact was outlined, focusing on joint funding for public schools, a bipartisan committee for sustainable energy, and a shared task force to attract new businesses. It was far from a comprehensive peace treaty, but it was a tangible, written document, a physical manifestation of their tentative agreement. The meeting concluded with a quiet, exhausted relief. Thorne and Caldwell, though still stiff, managed a brief, almost imperceptible nod to each other as they gathered their belongings. Cassie caught Leo's eye, a look of profound, disbelieving triumph in her gaze. It was a delicate, fragile thing, this nascent peace, but it was, for the first time in generations, something. The conference room, once a crucible of raw emotion, now sat silent, the lingering scent of stale coffee and barely contained animosity slowly dissipating. Leo Maxwell, slumped in a chair across from Cassandra Vance in his temporary office, felt a profound mix of exhaustion and exhilarating relief. Empty coffee cups and discarded notes littered the table between them, silent witnesses to the day's impossible feat. The setting sun cast long, weary shadows across the room, mirroring the long road still ahead. They actually talked, Cassie breathed, her voice a low murmur, her usual brisk efficiency momentarily replaced by sheer disbelief. And they agreed. "On principles, anyway. I've never seen anything like it, Leo." Leo nodded, rubbing his temples. "It's a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. Not yet. We've found a thread, but the fabric is still frayed. Those grievances run generations deep, Cassie. It's like trying to get two toddlers to share a toy they both believe is rightfully theirs, but this toy is a political legacy." Cassie ran a hand through her hair. "I know. And the political fallout for even attempting this? If this pact doesn't stick, we'll be crucified. Harding's approval ratings are already hanging by a thread." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "But if it does, if you pull this off..." The unspoken promise hung in the air, weighty and terrifying. Leo felt the enormity of his new role sinking in, a blend of daunting responsibility and unexpected purpose. This wasn't just a job. It was a tightrope walk over a chasm of political history. Later that evening, the familiar sounds of his own home were a balm to Leo's frayed nerves. The clatter of plastic blocks, Lily's gleeful shriek as Tom chased her, the comforting aroma of Sarah's pasta sauce. It was a world away from the sterile tension of the conference room. He found himself on the living room floor, playfully negotiating the return of a stolen superhero action figure between his two small, fiercely territorial diplomats. Lily, clutching the hero, declared, "Mine now," while Tom wailed, "But I had it first." Leo, with a gentle smile, suggested a shared custody agreement, complete with a timer. Sarah watched from the doorway, a soft, proud smile on her face. "You know," she said, after the superhero was safely returned to its rightful owner, for 3 minutes anyway, "you look different, more alive somehow." Leo scooped Lily onto his lap, her soft hair brushing his cheek. "It's insane, Sarah. Today I was mediating between two of the most powerful politicians in the state. Yesterday I was convincing Tom that broccoli was tiny trees for big heroes." He chuckled, a genuine unburdened sound. "But honestly, the skills aren't that different. It's all about listening, validating, and finding the shared cookie." Sarah sat beside him, taking his hand. "I always knew you had this in you, Leo. That spark. That way you see people, truly see them. It was just waiting for the right tantrum to set it free." He felt a deep sense of contentment, a quiet joy settling in his chest. His two worlds, once so disparate, were beginning to merge, shaping a new, stronger identity. He was still a stay-at-home dad, but now he was also something more. The next few days were a whirlwind of cautious optimism and simmering dissent. News outlets, initially wary, cautiously reported on the, quote, unprecedented bipartisan talks between the Thorne and Caldwell families. Is this a new era of cooperation? One headline mused, or just political theater? Social media buzzed with a mix of hopeful hashtags and cynical memes. At campaign headquarters, Cassie and Leo moved through a war room scenario. Monitors flashed with news snippets and internal polling data. "Public sentiment is tentatively positive," Cassie reported, tapping a pen against her tablet. "But the hardliners are already screaming betrayal. Thorne's old guard is furious. She even sat at the table. Caldwell's base sees any compromise as weakness." "They're reacting exactly as I'd expect," Leo said calmly, studying a chart of voter demographics. "It's the political equivalent of a toddler being told they can't have all the candy. They'll push back, test the boundaries. We need to reinforce the good behavior, the shared interests, before the sugar crash." "And how do we do that when their own aides are actively trying to undermine them?" Cassie asked, her jaw tight. "I'm hearing whispers of a potential leak, something damaging from decades ago aimed squarely at Caldwell. If that hits, it'll be a full-blown meltdown. Our ceasefire will be a distant memory." The external forces were gathering, a storm brewing on the horizon, threatening to unravel everything Leo had meticulously built. The call came late that evening, piercing the quiet hum of the campaign office. Cassie's voice, usually a steel-edged instrument, was laced with panic. "Leo, it's happened. A Thorne aide, an intern, apparently, just leaked a decades-old Caldwell family scandal to a fringe blog. Something about a land deal from the 70s, shady business, a cover-up. It's thin, but it's enough." Leo felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He pictured Caldwell's face, red with fury, the way he'd fumed about historical injustices. This wasn't just a political attack. It was a deeply personal betrayal, a reopening of old wounds that Leo had only just managed to scab over. "Caldwell?" he asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "He's incandescent," Cassie confirmed. "Threatening to pull out of all talks, demanding a public retraction, an apology from Thorne herself. He's calling it an act of war. The peace is on the brink, Leo. What do we do?" The fragile hope of the afternoon had shattered. This wasn't about policy or shared community projects anymore. This was about deeply ingrained personal loyalty and perceived betrayal. Sibling rivalry, writ large. It was the ultimate test of his unique abilities, a challenge far beyond any toddler tantrum. He knew, instinctively, that he couldn't wait for morning. He had to face this head-on, Tonight, Leo found Congressman Ethan Caldwell in his private residence, the late hour doing little to temper the politician's incandescent rage. Caldwell paced his immaculate living room, a half-empty tumbler of whiskey clutched in his hand, his usually slick hair disheveled. "They played us, Leo. They played us." All that talk of peace, of common ground. It was a distraction while they dug up dirt, a knife in the back. Leo stood calmly, his hands open, mirroring the non-threatening posture he used when Lily was in a full-blown meltdown. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend Thorne. Instead, he simply listened, allowing Caldwell's furious outburst to wash over him. "You feel profoundly betrayed," Leo said quietly, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. "You feel disrespected, as if everything you've worked for, everything your family stands for, is being undermined by a cheap shot from the past." Caldwell stopped pacing, his eyes bloodshot with anger fixing on Leo. He was unaccustomed to such direct, empathetic validation. "Exactly," he spat, momentarily disarmed by being truly heard. "And that anger is justified," Leo continued, stepping closer. "But what does giving in to that anger achieve, Ethan? Does it elevate your family's legacy? Does it show strength? Or does it simply give the Thorns exactly what they want? A fractured state, an unending feud, and the satisfaction of knowing they got under your skin." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your ambition, your vision for this state, it's bigger than this personal slight. You can choose to be the victim of this old grudge, or you can choose to be the leader who finally rises above it. The long-term strategic benefits of peace, of showing that you are above their petty games, far outweigh the temporary satisfaction of a retaliatory tantrum." Caldwell stared at Leo, still fuming, but a flicker of something else. Calculation, ambition, began to temper the rage. The tide was slowly turning. The formal conference room, once a crucible of animosity, now hummed with a different kind of tension. The fragile, electric current of impending peace. Days after the crisis, Leo Maxwell sat opposite Senator Eleanor Thorne and Congressman Ethan Caldwell, with Cassandra Vance observing from the periphery. The air still felt heavy with history, but Leo had worked tirelessly, in private, to mend the new cracks. Thorne, her usual imperious mask slightly softened, cleared her throat. "Congressman Caldwell," she began, her voice still refined, but lacking its former cutting edge. "The actions of my aide regarding the resurfacing of past incidents were entirely unauthorized and, I concede, profoundly disrespectful. For that, I offer my apology." It wasn't a capitulation, but a grudging acknowledgement, a testament to Leo's quiet appeal to her sense of legacy and honor. Caldwell, who had arrived still radiating a quiet fury, met her gaze. He considered her words, a battle raging behind his eyes. Leo had reminded him that true strength wasn't just in winning, but in strategically choosing peace. "Senator," Caldwell replied, his voice still firm, "your apology is accepted. Let us move forward." And with that, the impossible happened. The Community Investment Pact, a document outlining bipartisan initiatives for education and infrastructure, was brought forth. Leo watched, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest, as the two political titans, guided by an unlikely hand, signed the document. Flashbulbs popped, discreetly, as the aides were allowed back in. Thorne and Caldwell exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a handshake, and then a shared look of exhaustion and triumph. Leo caught Cassie's eye across the table. Her lips curved into a faint, proud smile. They had done it. That evening, a celebratory dinner, hosted by Senator Harding, buzzed with an unfamiliar camaraderie. The air was thick with relieved chatter and the clinking of glasses. Harding himself, a man whose political future had been rescued from the brink, raised a toast. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a pact, but a paradigm shift, and we owe it all," he boomed, his gaze sweeping to Leo, "to an extraordinary diplomat who navigated these treacherous waters with unparalleled insight." Leo felt a blush creep up his neck as applause erupted. It was a strange, exhilarating sensation, this public validation. He was no longer just the dad who talked down toddlers. He was the man who had brokered peace between political giants. Later, as the crowd thinned, Cassie approached him, a genuine beam on her face. "Leo," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "You are a marvel. I never thought I'd say this, but you are exactly what this broken system needs." She handed him a sleek business card, heavy with embossed lettering. "Director of Bipartisan Relations," she read, a proud glint in her eyes. "A permanent, high-paying position. It's yours, no interview required." Leo's heart swelled. He had done it. He had found his place. But as he looked at the card, a new thought, bolder and more ambitious, began to form in his mind. The next morning, Cassie Vance sat in her office, expecting Leo to walk in, brimming with gratitude. He did, but his gratitude was tempered with a steel she hadn't anticipated. "Cassie," he began, setting her own business card gently on her desk. "Thank you. It's an incredible offer. It's everything I could have dreamed of a week ago." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "But I have a counterproposal." Cassie raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise, then amusement, crossing her features. "I'm listening, Diplomat Maxwell." Leo leaned forward, his demeanor calm, confident, utterly unlike the bewildered dad who'd first walked into her office. "My skills aren't just for crisis management, Cassie. They're for building. For understanding the deep-seated emotional needs that fuel conflict, whether it's over a cookie or a century-old grudge." He produced a single sheet of paper, neatly typed. "I propose we establish a conflict resolution institute within the campaign. A dedicated division focused on long-term peace building, not just patching up temporary ceasefires. I want to build a curriculum, train a team, and apply these methods to broader political challenges. I want to be its director, with a budget and a performance-based incentive for measurable, lasting peace initiatives." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "My unique background isn't just for fixing problems, it's for creating lasting solutions. I'm not asking for a job, Cassie. I'm asking you to invest in a new way of doing politics." Cassie stared at him, her sharp eyes taking in every word, every nuance. The audacity was breathtaking. The logic, however, was irrefutable. She had seen his methods work miracles. She let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh, shaking her head in genuine admiration. A stay-at-home dad, who a week ago was mediating toy disputes, is now negotiating a new institute with a performance-based stake in bipartisan peace, she mused. "I knew my instincts about you were right, Leo Maxwell. I just had no idea how right." She extended her hand, a broad, brilliant smile transforming her face. "You have a deal. Welcome to the future of politics." Months later, the Conflict Resolution Institute hummed with a different kind of energy than the campaign headquarters. Leo Maxwell's office, bright and modern, featured a large whiteboard covered not with complex algorithms, but with flowcharts detailing emotional triggers and shared objectives. He stood before a diverse team, mediating a heated interdepartmental dispute over resource allocation within the party. "So what I hear," Leo said, his voice calm but firm, "is that both teams feel undervalued, like their toys aren't being shared fairly." He paused, watching the subtle shifts in posture, the slight clenching of jaws. "Can we agree that everyone ultimately wants the same thing? A stronger, more effective campaign?" Cassandra Vance leaned against the doorframe, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She watched Leo, no longer the bewildered dad, but a conductor orchestrating harmony from discord. He moved with an assuredness that had been absent in the diner, or even in his early days at HQ. This wasn't just a job, it was his calling. The former marketing strategist, who once felt professionally invisible, had finally built his own bridge. That evening, the familiar sounds of his own chaotic kitchen were music to Leo's ears. Lily and Tom, now a little older and wiser, were building an elaborate fort out of cushions, their squabbles quickly dissolving under Leo's gentle guidance. He didn't just diffuse, he fostered collaboration. Sarah watched him, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You know," she said, wrapping an arm around his waist, "I always knew you had this in you. You just needed bigger kids to mediate." Leo laughed, pulling her closer. The weight of professional ambition, once a quiet ache, had found its true anchor. He was no longer just a stay-at-home dad, nor just a political consultant. He was both, fully present in each role, his skills seamlessly flowing between worlds. The contentment was profound, a quiet hum of purpose found, and a life beautifully realigned. Leo Maxwell stood in his new office, the city skyline a vibrant backdrop, but his gaze was fixed on the camera. He was no longer the frazzled dad from the cafe, nor the bewildered consultant in the campaign office. He was the director of the Conflict Resolution Institute, a testament to an unseen value. "My journey," he began, his voice calm and resonant, "started not in boardrooms or hallowed halls of power, but in a kitchen sticky, with spilled milk and a park filled with the shouts of toddlers. It started with tantrums over cookies and disputes over shared toys. It was there, in the most ordinary of places, that I honed a skill I never knew was professional: the ability to truly listen, to de-escalate, to find the common ground in what felt like irreconcilable differences." He paused, a thoughtful smile playing on his lips. How many of us have these hidden talents? Skills forged in the crucible of daily life, managing a household, caring for an elderly parent, volunteering at a local shelter. These aren't bullet points on a resume, are they? But the empathy, the observation, the sheer grit required to navigate those worlds, those are universally valuable. They are the soft skills that can solve the hardest problems. He looked directly into the lens, a profound understanding in his eyes. What if the greatest diplomacy isn't learned in a lecture hall, but practiced, day in and day out, in the quiet, unseen corners of our lives? What if your greatest skill isn't found in a resume, but in the messy, beautiful reality of your daily life? Leo continued, his expression both challenging and encouraging. What if someone, a Cassandra Vance or an Alexander Sterling, saw that in you? What would you do? Would you shrink from the challenge, convinced you were just a stay-at-home dad, or just a waitress? Or would you have the courage to step onto that private jet, or into that campaign office, and trust the skills you never knew you possessed? He leaned forward slightly, his sincerity palpable. It takes courage to embrace the unknown, to believe that your unique perspective, honed in unconventional ways, holds immense power. It takes courage to demand your true worth, not as a gift, but as a valued partner. My story, like Esther's, is a powerful reminder that the person you are right now, in whatever role you inhabit, is not your final chapter. Your hidden talents, your forgotten passions, the skills you think no one sees, they have immense value. A single moment of authentic self-expression, a single act of kindness, a single sentence spoken in a language you weren't supposed to know, it can truly change everything. If Leo's story inspired you or made you think about your own unseen strengths, please give this video a thumbs up, Leo said, his tone shifting to a warm, appreciative cadence. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an incredible journey. He offered a final, genuine smile. And most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their big break might be just one observation, one conversation, or one moment of courage away. Thank you for listening.